Welcome to a Real Estate Wisdom Podcast. In this enlightening episode of the Real Estate Wisdom Podcast, we dive deep into the world of the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, FINTRAC, and its significant impact on the real estate industry. Join us as we welcome Amanda Ward, a seasoned broker manager from Century 21 Miller, who brings her extensive knowledge and expertise to the table. Together, we will explore the critical role of FINTRAC in combating money laundering and terrorist financing within real estate transactions, shedding light on the latest regulatory changes, compliance obligations, and the importance of the Know Your Client process. Whether you are a seller, buyer, or a real estate professional, this episode is packed with valuable insights on preparing for transactions, implementing strong compliance programs, and the future of regulatory compliance. Stay ahead of the curve and ensure your real estate dealings are both successful and compliant with our expert guidance. Here's a little background and some stats available that highlight the extent of money laundering through real estate transactions in Canada. General estimate of money laundered in Canada in 2020, a report from the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada suggested that anywhere from 45 billion to 113 billion is being laundered annually in Canada. A specific focus on Ontario, about 30 billion worth of ill-gotten gain has been laundered through Ontario real estate transactions over a 10-year period, according to money laundering inquiry by the British Columbia government. British Columbia's real estate, also the expert panel on money laundering in BC real estate suggested conservative estimates of 46.7 billion being laundered in a single year. Yes, you can guess which year was though. Greater Toronto Area analysis since 2008, 28 billion in GTA housing has been acquired through companies with the majority being private entities, indicating a potential for money laundering through opaque ownership structure. These stats underscore the significant issue of money laundering within the Canadian real estate market, affecting various regions and involving substantial amounts of money. So it's not only interest rate, inflation. These are actually inflation also, and interest rate also can be caused by these heavy money laundering stuff as well. So today we're going to discuss about FINTRAC and how government put these regulations in place so we can do the check mark as a real estate professional if the transactions are happening are legit or not legit. So please help me welcome Amanda Ward. Hi Amanda, how are you?
I'm good, thanks Fish. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I love this new setting which office have put together. Thanks to Goodale Miller team and Bill who did this. I was watching it like when he did this, and it's fantastic. He just did just like professional.
Yeah, nice enhancement, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, so how's it going with you?
Things are going great. Very busy.
Yeah.
Spring market is here, but all in all, very good.
You had a good spring break?
I did, yes.
Fantastic. Where you went?
Nowhere exciting. Ottawa for a couple of days with family, but
Right.
Back at work now, and we're hoping the market's going to be a good one this spring.
Well, that's what we're hoping for. Weather haven't started like that. First day of the spring, we had the snow.
I know.
It's like a winter. I won't take you much time. We talked about that last week in the sales meeting. We're talking about the FINTRAC. In people who already know what FINTRAC is, like in my introduction. But I'd like to know from you. So can you give the brief overview about FINTRAC and its primary role in the real estate sector?
Yeah, so FINTRAC is mandated by the federal government of Canada. And essentially, when it comes to real estate, what it requires us to do is know our clients, so know who we're dealing with, and sort of assess any potential risk and report those risks when required.
Yeah, for sure. I just shared the stats, how it's significant, and how much it's impacted real estate transactions.
Yeah.
And, we talk about the prices are so high. We talk about, how it's impacting. It's a big impact on those.
Yeah.
Right. So it's good to know. And I'm glad to work with the brokerage who's on top of this. I know I saw the report from the board this morning, but in the brokerage, we already have updated it. So which is great. So how does FINTRAC mandate intersect with the day-to-day operations of real estate professionals?
So I think the way that it impacts it is it's our first obligation as a real estate agent.
Right.
So, of course, there's lots of paperwork involved in any real estate transaction, lots of things to know. But the first thing we're supposed to be doing is verifying our client's identification. Like I said, knowing who we're working with.
Right.
And making sure that we're documenting their ID. And again, assessing the level of risk, which is a really important component. So that's one of the first key components of any new client-agent relationship.
Right.
And then, of course, there's a secondary obligation there, which is when we get to the point where someone's purchasing a property, we need to know a little bit more information and be able to verify where those deposit funds are coming from so that we're making sure there is no money laundering happening. So it's a pretty important component of a real estate transaction.
No, that's for sure. And most of the time, my clients are very cooperative. But also, people ask questions as well because everybody have the privacy concern that sharing my data, sharing my bank account number, sharing my all the information, all those questions come out. And I thought it's better to explain coming out from the brokerage manager and also what's the regulation we have and what mandatory for us to do that from the government perspective and from the FINTRAC perspective. I think it'll be a good idea to share this information with our listeners.
I think it's important to note because I know that I've experienced situations before where we've had clients of the brokerage who have said, well, I've purchased properties before and I've never had to show my ID and I've never had to do these things. I think that's, there's a couple of things there. First of all, not all brokerages are compliant. There's a lot of realtors out there who do not fulfill their FINTRAC obligations. So that sets an unfortunate precedent with a consumer.
Right.
But then in addition to that, there's also the fact that times change. So FINTRAC hasn't always been an obligation. It depends on when that consumer last bought or sold property. If it was 10 plus years ago, we didn't have FINTRAC obligations.
Right.
So things in real estate are always evolving and FINTRAC has now become a very big, important component of it. But you're right, there are a lot of clients out there who are sensitive to not wanting to share personal information. But we have tools to help with that. I'm one of the things that I've explained to our agents is that there is a brochure called Your Real Estate Agent is Asking Questions for a Reason. And in that brochure, it details all of the reasons why we do what we do.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. But our realtor, most of the time it happens, we're not able to explain to our clients that why we need that. And we asking, okay, we need your ID. And why you need my ID? I need your bank account number. Why you need the bank account? So it's relevant questions from the clients to ask about it. And definitely in this DNA, when identity theft and everything happened and all the frauds are happening, it's big, big concern for them.
Yeah.
Right? So looking to that, compliance obligations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the key compliance obligations that real estate brokers and sales reps must adhere to under FINTRAC regulations?
So there's a few. The first one really is, like I said, identifying your client. So
Right.
that is where we will ask for a piece of ID. That can be a driver's license, a passport. And if those things are not available, then there's secondary methods that we can utilize. So we can do multiple pieces of a utility bill,
Mhm.
it's called a dual ID method, or
Right.
we can pull a client's credit report
Right.
to verify. So there's several different things that we can do, but we have to do one of those things in order to verify who it is that we're dealing with.
Right.
And then in conjunction with that, they actually just updated this form. So it used to be that we would assess their level of risk as either low, medium, or high. There was a whole series of criteria that agents had to be aware of. So we were conducting regular training on those things. Now they've just updated it. So rather than low, medium, and high, there's actually a whole series of questions that the agent has to ask themselves about this client and answer.
Right. Well, I know like every time we say too much paperwork. That's what the sales rep complain about, and even for the for audit purpose as well, that the brokerages have to go through and look into that, like if those questions being answered or not answered. It's a big job.
It is, yeah.
And our the staff need to be trained, our admin department need to be trained. And definitely, like when you running the brokerage for 100, 150 to like in some brokerages, like the 500 people, it's hard to keep all in track.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people ask what brokerages does or what the listing you do, and it's not about just listing on MLS. There's a lot of things which goes behind the scenes,
Absolutely.
And this is one of it.
Yeah.
So I know we talking about this one, and in the past it happens, and I know people are non-compliant and asking the information when the transaction is happening. So when they should be asking that information, if I'm meeting somebody approach me today and say, hey, I want to buy a house, and can you go and show me the property? And the first thing I say, yeah, let's go and see the property, but I don't know you.
Yeah.
Right. So what time, as you mentioned, before, we can ask for those IDs, and should we ask a physical copy, or just ask them to email it to us or SMS to us,
Yeah, no, great question. So ideally, FINTRAC would have us asking for identification at the first point of contact. So
Right.
when we're first meeting a client in person, we should be asking them to provide us with that ID. And it is very important that that be done in person. You need to physically verify their identification. It shouldn't be sent in a text message or an email. That violates all kinds of privacy issues, not to mention the fact that there could be fraud happening. You can alter photos, use AI to edit things. So you really need to have a physical copy. If we have a client who's not physically present, then we're able to do a remote verification. But that's only in situations where there's no physical way to actually verify their ID. And we do have several tools that can assist us with that. So it's one of those two things. But certainly, ideally, it would be the first point of contact, no later than prior to drafting any other paperwork. So the minute we're entering into any kind of client representation agreement,
Right.
That we should have already verified their identification using the FINTRAC forms.
Well, this is the great information, and I also even with the technology, we get sometime lazy, and we say, hey, I met you today, and we had the great conversation, but hey, I forgot to get your ID. Can you send it email to me, or I can send you this link, which you can verify, which is great actually. FinTracker,
Yes.
The new tool is fantastic. It scans the card, and it does all the things like a verification that is the authentic or not. In some of them, they also have the face recognition as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't. Most importantly, it doesn't keep that person's ID in your phone, right?
Correct.
So that's one of the key features there.
Okay, that's a big responsibility for us at the realtors as well, keeping all those records in the private, and we always being reminded for that, how to keep those secure. If you're taking a picture or anything, which is first of all, we shouldn't be taking those pictures. But the second, if you're doing it, you're just removing it the right away and protecting our clients. So,
Yeah.
which is great information. I know we talk about that. Can you explain the importance of the know your client and how it impacts real estate transactions? What kind of questions we should be asking when knowing our clients?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions from a realtor's perspective is that they feel like with these FINTRAC requirements, we have to go out and be a private investigator. That's actually not the case. We don't have to start diving deep into what our clients are up to and if there's anything suspicious going on. There is a series of 17 questions. It includes things like, their proximity to international airports, if you've dealt with them in the past or not. So all of these things that kind of, and there is literally a scoring system that's associated with each question. So if it scores a certain amount or higher, then we have an obligation to report it. And if it's a certain amount or lower, then we know that we're okay to proceed with that transaction. But one of the things I've tried to make clear to our agents here at Century 21 Miller is you don't have to be a private investigator. Your obligation starts and ends with trying to know who your client is. So again, asking some simple questions like what they do for a living, verifying their ID, whether or not you've dealt with them in the past, if it's somebody that you know, or if it's somebody new that you've received a lead off the internet as an example. All of these things kind of come into play. And if there is cause for concern, if their score is higher, our obligation is then to just report it to the government.
Right.
They will then do their own investigation if it's required, which it's not. Even in the cases where the score is higher, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something nefarious going on. You know what I mean? It just means that there's something to potentially look into. So our obligation starts and ends with knowing your client and reporting.
Yeah, that's what it is. And a lot of times we happen to have that tendency because realtors not only, they wear different hats, right?
Yes, many.
They need to know about the mortgages. They need to know about legal obligations, like a law side of it. They also need to be maintenance guy. They also need to be a stager. They also need to be counselor.
Yeah, I was going to say therapist is a pretty big one. Yeah. It's a pretty big one, actually.
and that's like the one thing, and I think we all do it, most of the realtors do that, but I put a lot of time in knowing my client, having that sit down with them and knowing where they're coming from, knowing their needs and knowing their lifestyle, what they do. And those questions can come and you can figure it out, first thing people tell, what they do. If they're moving from abroad and they're just settling over here, they say what they used to do over there. And also, my question is, okay, your down payment, where it will be coming from?
Yeah.
Knowing all that information from the very starting, it helped me plan it, how I'm going to help them.
Well, and those are questions that even if we didn't have a FINTRAC obligation, those are part of the qualifying process of a realtor, right?
Exactly.
If we're going to help somebody acquire a property, we need to know what kind of income they have. We need to know, we want to make sure that we're protecting their financial future. So we have to sort of know some of this information because it's going to help us ultimately make sure that they're in the right property going forward, right?
Oh,
so it all matters in the end.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things which can be asked, but it's maybe not necessary. But in these cases over here, there's some simple information. I know, in the industry, they make the FINTRAC a very scary thing.
Yeah.
What if I didn't do this? But it's not scary. It's just you gathering the information, you're just reporting it, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? You just follow the form. What do you have to fill out? If you know, that's great. If you don't know, ask.
Yeah, and one of the things I've actually made clear in the most recent training that we've done is there's also, I feel, a misconception about what if my client scores higher than the required amount, does that mean I can't work with that client? And I have, no, it doesn't. It just means we have an obligation to report.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean that you can't proceed with that transaction because there's no scoring system that will tell us whether or not something illegal is happening, right?
For sure.
Like I said, our obligation starts and ends with the reporting process. So it's one of those, it is a big misconception, and there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding when it comes to real estate. And that is because I think there's probably insufficient training on it in a lot of cases.
I can see that a lot of time. I remember, last year I had my listing. And this realtor, the funds got transferred from somewhere from the Middle East, and it was not through the proper banking system. They wired it, but it's from the just like what this service when you transfer money and all.
Like an electronic funds transfer, or
no, like you go to the mall. Oh, the Union.
okay, yeah. Western Union kind
Western
of thing?
Union
Yeah.
kind of, right? So that when it come in, the office they use, they're coming from not the banking institution or
Okay.
not through the banking institution. It coming from abroad.
Right.
How to verify that, right? But then we ask the questions and everything, come out it's legit. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just we need to know where it's coming from, which bank account is coming from,
Right.
so it can be tracked,
Yep.
or it can be reported, right? Because that's the obligation which we have. But the realtor who was dealing with that, he didn't get the training properly, and it was hard for him to explain to his client. Deal was done, we just waiting for the deposit, right? And it was creating a lot of confusion and a lot of suspicion on that.
Yeah.
But it's not just we have to report it.
Exactly.
And that's all it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of impact on buyers and sellers, right? How should sellers and buyers prepare for our real estate transactions in light of FINTRAC regulations?
So I don't think there's a ton for a buyer and seller that they need to do necessarily, other than just know why their realtor is going to ask them certain things. Like I said, there's some resistance when you ask somebody for their photo ID. So if a consumer was trying to get prepared for a purchase or a sale of a home, just kind of knowing why an agent is asking what they're asking, and knowing that it's not coming from a place of suspicion or anything like that. It's coming from a place of, federally mandated requirements on our behalf. And having all of their affairs in order, in terms of, again, if they're going to be, sometimes we can't tell, depending on how the deposit's being handed in,
Right.
we can't necessarily tell what bank account it's coming from. So we may have to ask you, what's your bank account number? Is it a checking or a savings account? So I think that the best thing they can do is just be educated on this subject, so that
Right.
they're not feeling worried about anything. And I think that goes hand in hand with choosing the right agent, to make sure that agent, if an agent explains things properly,
Right.
then that alleviates a lot of questions, concerns, and kind of fuzziness, right?
Oh, for
It
sure.
clarifies the whole process.
Yeah, it's all about clear communication, and most of the time I will say, if you keep in writing, sometimes it's better understanding, because when we're communicating with each other and we're just saying that, you said it, but person might forgot about it, right?
Yeah.
Or they just ignore it because they're focusing on that property, purchasing that property, and they forget about nitty-gritty stuff which needed.
I know, myself, if I put myself in a consumer's shoes, if I were going out to see a property with maybe a realtor for the first time, and I show up and they say, well, I'm going to need to see your ID. Yeah, I might be like, you need my ID. Why, right? But if that agent instead takes the approach of, listen, I do have requirements under FINTRAC. This is why. So here's a brochure that explains it, but I do need to see your ID, and here's the reasons why. Then as a consumer, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Here you go. Not a big deal, right? So it's all about educating the consumer, I would say.
Oh, for sure. That's how I find. When you go to the bank, even I'm banking with one of the bank for a long time. And every time any financial transactions, a big transaction's happening, they ask for my ID.
Yeah.
Even I go to the branch and we happily give it to them. But we are very hesitant to give it to a realtor.
Yeah.
But, it's everybody have their own preference, but else at the same time, they need to know what kind of information will sellers and buyers need to provide, and why is the necessary for compliance.
And making sure that we are protecting their information as well, right?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
There's been a lot of, news stories in the media lately about hacking and people's information being made public. So, you can also alleviate those concerns by making sure that you are explaining things like FINTRAC, or where I have used this app.
Right.
None of your information is stored on my phone. It's all at the office. Things are kept in very secure servers, so there's no potential risk to the client.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Well, let's talk about the recent regulatory changes and update.
Yes.
What happens? So could you discuss any recent changes into FINTRAC regulations that real estate professionals should be aware of?
Yeah, so there were a couple of major changes just made in the last couple of months. The biggest one, like I said, was the client ID form. So rather, because before we had the low, medium, high risk analysis, but I think that was pretty vague, right? Like you had to really know what the criteria was. So now what they've implemented is this 17 questions that are yes, no, or maybe in some cases, and the yes, no, or maybe equates to a certain score. Which I actually think is probably better. It's a little bit more detailed and
for sure
a little bit more foolproof, if you will, right?
Yeah, so you're not guessing like what is medium, what is high, or what is low.
Yeah, like the low, medium, high makes a lot of sense for agents who are properly trained and know the criteria, but I think a lot of us didn't. So this streamlines that process a little bit. The second change that we just recently saw was to what's called the receipt of funds record.
Right.
So that's a form that has to be filled out anytime a buyer is providing a deposit. And one of the major changes on that form is just that now we actually will repeat sort of the client identification on that form, and it gives us an opportunity that if a secondary party is also providing part of that deposit, we can note that right there on that form as well. So a lot of the times, consumer first-time buyer, as an example, can't afford the down payment, so they go to the bank of mom and dad.
Exactly.
And if mom and dad are providing the deposit, then we also need to verify the identification of the parents. So this new form, this new change on the form, I should say, allows us to do that in a little bit more of a simpler format rather than fully doing another ID form for those parents. We can just kind of note it right there on the form.
Yeah.
So those are two of the bigger changes.
For sure. Ideally, I will say, if you're receiving a gift from your parents, do it in advance because you're already in the market, you're going to purchase it, and transfer the funds in your account.
Yeah.
And in that way, with the gift, the letter with the bank normally asks for when you're receiving a gift, and it should stay in that account for certain period of time. But in that way you can avoid those kind of confusion and where this money coming from, why this person is paying, why say these are some relevant questions which the government going to ask if it comes to investigation and everything. But also, why create a suspicion on anything?
No, it simplifies the process for
Simplify
sure.
the process, and it become much easier for everyone. And keep the transaction and everything smooth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So looking to that, regulatory changes, how have the updated regulations regarding large cash and virtual currency transactions affected real estate transactions? I know we are now able to accept Bitcoins and stuff as well.
Yes, we are. Although, and again, so to be clear, the cash transactions is an individual brokerage sort of policy and decision. So as an example, at our brokerage, we do not accept large cash transactions. But if you do, there are certain rules and regulations that you do have to abide by. There are reporting that needs to happen. And then sometimes people will get creative where they try to provide a $5,000 deposit today and a $5,000 deposit tomorrow. And so if we do that, we're within the 24-hour rule. So again, there's just more reporting that has to happen under the new legislation.
So limit is $10,000, right? Under $10,000.
Yeah, anything above $10,000 needs to be reported.
For sure. Well, I don't think these days anybody is doing $10,000.
Not in our market, that's for sure.
For sure. Again, in the coming out the compliance program implementation, what does a strong compliance program look like for a real estate brokerage, and how does C21 Miller ensures adherence to these standards?
Yeah, so at the brokerage level, we have an entire brokerage analysis report that needs to be filled out every 2 years. It's literally a binder about this thick. And with that sort of analysis, we kind of go through all of our business and we have to answer certain questions. So that is an obligation of the brokerages. And like I said, it has to be updated. We just updated ours in December. And then, of course, subsequent to that, we have an obligation to make sure that we're training our agents on a very regular basis. So we do our training at least once a year, even when there hasn't been any updates, because we hire new agents. Some people forget things. Everybody needs a bit of a refresher. So we do have training obligations. And then, of course, I guess the third and final part of it is We have a fantastic trade department here that will meticulously comb through all of our agents' paperwork to make sure that everything has been done correctly and handed in a timely manner. So, like, we quite simply won't process a deal unless we have the FINTRAC forms that have been fully filled out and handed in, right? It's, like I said, the first part of a transaction. So, we also make sure that we're compliant in terms of making sure our agents are following all the rules.
That's fantastic, and that's why I love our brokerage as well, because they keep me on my toe
That's
as
right.
well. At the same time, it protects me as well and my clients together. So having like a double check like these, like sometimes like a 3 times check, like that's really helpful in keeping the standards high, and also like keeping the brokerage. That's why they're renowned brokerage.
Yeah, I think it does make a big difference. And in my career, I've seen many brokerages, some fantastic ones and some not so fantastic ones. And I really think it does make a difference because we do get audited every once in a while. So FINTRAC can perform audits on brokerages,
Right.
and they will hand down very hefty fines, and those fines can then be passed on to our realtors, which we don't want, right? So.
Yeah.
Our philosophy is kind of nip that in the bud by making sure we all just do what we need to do, and then we don't have to be concerned about any audits.
So tell me a little bit more about like now. I'm not going to ask the brokerage name anything, but like what the penalty, the amount they have to pay if they found it guilty per transactions, right?
FINTRAC penalties can range from $10, $20, $50,000 all the way up to 6 figures. Like,
wow.
We've seen fines handed down in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really no joke, right? And I don't even disagree with that, because we're talking about money laundering and terrorism. Like, these are major concerns, and we do have a role to play in making sure that we're trying, at least anyways, to temper that, right?
Yeah, like we just like the one gateway where we can be checked, and most of the time is like a last gateway where they can be checked, because a lot of things happening in this market, and one was the biggest thing when I was hearing, like, researching and doing the stats on that, like billions and billions of dollars, and like especially in real estate transaction happen, and which fund to terrorist and other illegal activities, human trafficking, and all those things. Like it's like wow, amazing. And we talk about inflationary prices, like non-affordability, and this is one of the biggest contribution. Money laundering is the biggest contribution to that inflated prices. And we have seen it. Like I remember in 2017, there was a news, like there was like $1 trillion was out from China and other countries, like and they were buying purchased property, and you can see like some people coming over here, they don't even look like they can afford the $1 million house, and they just spending money, paying over stuff. Like we have the stories in Vancouver, BC, like when they bought the condo and whole condos were empty, nobody lived over there. So it's a big concern, and BC have done some investigation on those ones, and even from the area, Tim Hudak, like I was mentioning about that as well, that amount is, this is, we just come to know like over here like the tip of the iceberg, but there's huge thing. But like if we're doing our due diligence, and most of the time happens like the realtors who are doing their things properly and brokerages who are doing things properly, unfortunately they have to work harder with these things happening, to protect not only our clients but also helping the country where we live in. Right.
And I've always said this, 98% of our deals are non-suspicious transactions that go forward with no hiccups, no issues. It's just about using your skills to uncover that 1 to 2% where there could be something, right? I know that a lot of our agents, their clientele is repeat and referral business, so there's usually some kind of personal relationship there, which honestly helps reduce that number. But when you're dealing with an agent who does a lot of, as an example, like online lead generation and are dealing with a lot of consumers that they don't know that are completely strangers off the internet, that's where we see the increase in suspicious transactions, right?
Yeah, for sure. Here's like a little bit, not the off topic, but it just come to my mind. As a seller, I don't know who's the buyer, like, for a foreign buyer, for example, coming in. I don't know what they do and where they're going to put the money, where the money is coming from. How they will get impacted in these kind of transactions. Do the seller get impacted? Does the seller agent get impacted? Or what the seller agent could do to identify those things and create the red signal that doesn't look like this is the legit transaction, even they're paying more. How they can do that, how they can protect it.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of like a mutual understanding in the industry that when a buyer's agent brings us an offer, that we're relying on the fact that our colleague has done their due diligence and has vetted that buyer. But to your point, how do we really know, right? And you don't. So I think all you can do is when you receive an offer on that listing, you do have an open conversation with that buyer's agent and
Right.
ask some poignant questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, so tell me a little bit about your buyer. How long have you known them? Have you ever done business with them in the past? Where are they coming from, right? Like, these are all questions that can at least help you sort of determine whether or not that agent has done some of their due diligence and what type of relationship the agent has with that buyer.
Yeah.
It's not going to be foolproof, but it at least, helps your seller have some confidence that we're sort of trying to vet who it is that we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
We can't sort of cross the line into privacy issues where we're asking for things like their ID and financial statements and all that, but we can ask that agent if they've done their due diligence, their
Yeah,
due diligence. Have
for
you
sure.
verified their ID? Has your buyer been pre-qualified with which bank? Like, these are the things that we can ask to kind of sort of suss out what their relationship is with that buyer.
No, definitely, like, those things are necessary. What makes it a little bit harder, and especially in the competing market, when you're looking into, then one offer came out 50,000 less, the another 100,000 more, and then sellers are like, yeah, I will take it, and forget about everything else. Why it's looking suspicious? Property, like, and I look into that. If the property been shown by the agent, and even it's shown by the agent, like an agent went himself just to put the presence over there, or the real buyers were there, because I've seen in the past it happened that they booked the showings and the agent only went over there, or even agent didn't show up, and then they're bringing the offer, and sometimes they didn't even look at the property and they're putting an offer.
Oh yeah, that's a huge red flag, right? And it does happen more than you would think.
Yeah, it does happen, and so those are some big signals. Like, to my fellow colleague and realtors out there, like, especially in listing agents, keep an eye on those ones. Like, don't get oh yeah, we got the fantastic offer, now the market is down, and those people, like, they do that kind of stuff. Like, they know the property is million worth, and now they're offering 1.2. They say, hey, market is going up, I sold over asking, but forget about everything else, like why it's happening. And
it's the old adage, if it seems too good to be true, sometimes it is.
Exactly. So in my opinion, like, be careful, and be very careful.
Yes.
That's what I can say. Well, I know the role of technology and compliance played a big role. We already talked about the app which we're using. FINTRAC is a fantastic app over here. But in terms of like how the technology impacted the way real estate brokerage manage FINTRAC compliance.
Yeah, I think it's a huge, very resourceful tool for us. So one of the things that we did touch on in our last FINTRAC training was this new app called FinTracker.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of referenced it a few times today, but that is a tool that allows you to scan a client's ID, and it kind of pre-populates a lot of the fields for you. So not only does it verify that it's a valid ID, which is nice,
Right.
But it also takes a lot of the legwork out for the realtor.
Right.
So those are two really good benefits of it. It does allow you to do the remote verification, so that's fantastic when we have a client who's overseas or on vacation at the time that they want to submit an offer or something like that. No, technology is a huge blessing. I think, like I said, one of the biggest requirements is that we don't have people sending us photos of their ID. So FinTracker checks all of those boxes,
Yes.
and it's been hugely helpful for us.
No, that's fantastic. Well, related to that question as well, like what about the existing client? And how long I have to be, they have to be my existing client and say, like, you know what, they just did the transaction like 2 years ago. I know them and everything's fine. Um, is that enough, or should I do the ID
So
every transaction?
FinTrack doesn't actually have a policy per se, as far as I know,
Right.
but we have an internal brokerage policy, which is 12 months.
Yeah.
So if you haven't done a transaction with that client in the last 12 months, then we want you re-verifying their ID. And that's for several reasons. Yes, you already know them and you verified their ID in the past, but first of all, the number one thing is we do need a current valid ID. So
Right.
you might have done a deal with them 2 years ago, and then maybe their driver's license expired 6 months ago.
Right.
Well, now we have an expired identification on file, right? So,
Yeah.
Every few years, obviously, we want to make sure that we're updating that. For us, it's 12 months.
For sure. Like, and so if I'm doing the 2 or 3 transactions from the same client, I don't have to provide the FinTrack all the time. Still, you have to provide it, right?
As long as you
Each
verified it,
transaction.
yeah. Like, let's just say somebody is going to sell their property and buy a home and buy an investment property. So 3 transactions.
Right.
As long as those 3 transactions happen within 12 months of each other, you wouldn't have to redo the identification form. But if one of those transactions were outside of the 12 months of the last time you verified their ID, you would want to redo that process.
Yeah, my best policy is like, it doesn't matter if I know that my client for long, I still verify their ID because 2 or 3 reasons. One, it can be like, they have changed the address.
Yeah.
The other thing is like that they changed their job because we have to put that information as well. And receipt of funds, like definitely we need that information all the time anyway. Different accounts it's coming from.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, it's just the best practice in my opinion. So there's nothing, and forgot about that, like it's been more than 1 year when I did the last transaction.
I agree. Like, I could see if the transactions were super close together,
Correct.
not wanting to ask for it a second time.
Yeah.
But if it's been more than a few months, let's call it,
Yeah.
I think it's just a best practice to ask for it every time. That way you're covering your bases.
Oh, for sure. Like, and that's why, it doesn't give me like a checklist, right?
Yeah.
You just do it, like, this is all done.
Exactly.
And you're good with that, right? Collaboration with law enforcement and other agency. I don't know, like it's probably applied to us at the brokerage level, but in what way does FinTrack collaborate with law enforcement and other agency to combat money laundering and terrorist financing?
Yeah, so certainly as a brokerage, we don't have a direct correlation with any kind of law enforcement. We have a reporting process that we have to do.
Right.
So whenever we have a suspicious transaction, we have to file a report. It is quite lengthy, actually, and we'll fill in all the details of why it's suspicious and whatnot. But then what the government does with that, I honestly couldn't even really tell you.
Yeah,
that's
right.
where our obligation stops.
Yeah.
I would have to assume, though, that they would then take that suspicious transaction report, obviously analyze it and reach out to any, like if there was obviously a concern of terrorism as an example,
Right.
I would assume that they would tap into any kind of federal government agency database that they need to cross-reference this person in
For
if
sure.
they have a criminal record or anything like that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure that that FinTrack themselves have crossover with those
Yeah.
bodies, but at the brokerage level, we do not. I'm not calling the police with a suspicious transaction.
No, like definitely we're just reporting it, and
Yeah.
they do their things and they're collecting all that information. Even on the a lot of time the CRA asks for that information as well. I remember when I was on the board, they reach out to board ask certain transactions. That's we don't deal with that. We just provide the MLS data and stuff when they did, what transaction they did, they reported properly and not that's not our information. And I think brokerages got those information.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to them as well and report it why a transaction happened, because they probably see a discrepancy somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And those are the things and I think it's interconnected between CRA. I know the financial institutions have to do,
Yes.
as well as the lawyer have to do identify as well.
Yeah.
So there's a different checks they need to be done, and we're just part of it. We just
Yeah, everybody has their role, and each role has their own obligations under
Right,
FINTRAC. But I know that I get anyways, regular reporting on fines that have been
Right.
issued, and one of the biggest ones is to financial institutions, oddly enough. So
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
For
they
sure.
also have their own set of obligations.
Now that's a big one, and I cannot take off from my head how much it's impacting, and this is the one of the biggest. We talk about interest rate, we talk about how the affordability not happening, and we talk about inflation. The one thing which I don't hear enough about is this,
Yeah.
that how much we talk about like foreign buyers ban, but money coming from outside, not necessarily just the foreign buyer.
Yeah.
People who are living over here and they have the money outside and they're bringing it over here, or they've been instrumental in providing that. Somebody say, to, 100,000 I want to send, you can keep the 10,000 and 90,000, just give it to me.
Yeah.
Hawala, I heard about those kind of things. When people bring their outside money into the different process to tax evasion and all this, right? Sometimes it's not about the illegal activity. It's
No.
Well, tax evasion is illegal as well.
But yeah, they can be quite creative.
Yeah, it could be a very creative, but you don't know where this money going to, right? It could be used to bomb somewhere, or it could be used to human trafficking, or it's used to be a drugs. All those informations coming out, where they getting money from.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one of the things we've seen
is money laundering.
We've seen in real estate quite often is things like there are people who are notorious for submitting offers that are conditional,
Right.
and then the deal falls apart. They say that they can't get their financing, or they come up with a reason why they don't. And then what they do is they request their deposit funds back in a different name. So we have a very strict policy that we will only issue a deposit back to whoever gave us that deposit.
Correct.
And that is exactly to avoid money laundering, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the other challenge happen, when the money coming from different person's name, then when you're refunding money on your name, that's will be different as well. So having those checks. So that's why it's important. That's why I say, don't create any confusion. Transfer the account on yours. If you are the primary one on there, and that will make things smoother.
Yes. Raises less questions for sure.
Yeah. We talk about these real estate professionals stay proactive in adapting the potential regulatory shifts, and that's why the education is so important. Keeping up to date with the trends, what's going on, what the regulations are changing. So, our brokerage protects us pretty well. And as a realtor myself, I keep up to date and recommend you to keep up to date and follow new rules and regulations. Discard all the old forms and use the new forms.
Yes.
There's a lot of time that happens. Well, thank you again, but I just want to have, before we go, closing thoughts about what final advice would you give our listeners, especially those in the real estate industry, regarding FINTRAC compliance, and where can our listeners find more resource and information to further understanding of FINTRACs?
Yeah, I think my best advice, especially to real estate practitioners, is make sure that you stay up to date with all the changes, because it does change quite often. Educate yourself so that you have the ability to then pass that education down to your clients. That will just make you a better realtor as a whole, because we want to make sure that we're able to articulate and explain to our clients why it is that we do the things that we do. So I think that that's probably the most important part of it. If your brokerage is not having regular training, make sure that you're asking for that training. It's just important to stay abreast of all of the changes and making sure that we're always up to date with everything that we need to know. So And then in terms of tools and resources, FINTRAC has a website that has a lot of good resources on there. They have lots of different definitions and descriptions of different types of transaction, types of people, like, politically exposed people, heads of international organizations. There are a few other requirements we kind of haven't touched on today, but
Yes.
those are very different and unique cases. But the FINTRAC website is a fantastic resource, and I know I myself reference it quite often. So anytime you have questions, you can certainly refer to that website, and it usually will help answer any questions you have.
Well, the education is available all over. Your boards are doing it. Like, I know the ARMDRAB, TRAB, other neighboring boards, like they all have the courses and everything to keep you up to date. If you're not getting enough from your brokerage, but as a realtor, always ask questions. If you're not sure about something, ask questions. And same thing I talk about our clients, our sellers or buyers, ask questions as well. Because if you don't ask and if you assume, chances are you miss something.
Yeah.
So thank you for watching. I hope you like our new setting over here, and I'm pretty excited for more episodes to come in. Please do comment. We'll love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what other things you want to know about. We get the information from the ground level, also get from the board level, brokerage level, and I try to recycle that knowledge and share it with you, including my personal experience and the professional experience working in this industry. So love to hear from you. Don't forget to share, comment, and subscribe to our podcast. You can watch us on YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcast you can listen to as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and stay safe. This podcast is for informational purpose only and should not be considered as financial or investment advice. Consult with your professional before making any real estate decisions.